We are running up to the last presentation of the day by Scott Hansel. I would like to remind everyone that the QA is going to be happening in the QA tab on the right of your screen. And now to Scott. Scott is a coder, a speaker, a blogger, a teacher, and a podcaster, and he writes about .NET and relationships. Scott, the stage is yours.
Hey, friends. Thank you so much. Appreciate the introduction. Glad to have you all here today. I wish I could see you in person. Maybe next year we'll be able to spend time together. Today, I want to talk to you about mentorship, the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, and the importance of storytelling when talking to early in career developers and encouraging the next generation of craftspeople. Now, I went and I put together these slides here, and you might notice immediately that this font is Comic Sans, and a lot of people think that this font is ugly. So I was told that my slides would not be professional unless I made the better font. So I'm going to change that font to something prettier. And then I was told that my fonts would not be professional. My slides would not be professional if I didn't have a cool background. So then I decided to make a background like this that would show you what a successful programmer's desk looks like. But in fact, that's not what a professional developer's desk looks like. It usually looks more like this. And that really speaks to one of the issues that happens when we introduce people into tech. We give them an impression of what it's going to be like, when in fact, it's going to be something entirely different. But the most important thing that we want early in career people to think and feel about joining us as they become mentors and sponsors themselves is that they should feel welcome. So I'm glad that you're here, and I hope that you are welcoming to the next generation as well. So let's talk a little bit about attitude and style as we, as tech leaders, encourage the next generation. And I want to show you this great magazine cover. This is actually from March of 1984. March of 1984. This is the cover of the TI 99 users group. This is this Texas Instruments computer here on the desk. And you notice that we have a young lady here programming the computer. She's got her dress and her glasses and her gum. She's blowing bubbles with her gum. And I really think like that's what we wanted tech to be like. And just about after 1984, it kind of turned into a different kind of a vibe. But I hope that tech welcomes you warmly in an inclusive way, and that we can have more folks feel comfortable being themselves and also being programmers. I really like the idea of what my friend Grace Mac-Jones said, which is normalizing normal people coding. I also want to bring up this interesting quote here about inclusion. I really like this idea that inclusion isn't being asked to dance. A lot of time we hear this quote, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. I like a better one, a better alternative from Daniel Jude here, which is inclusion is being a member of the party planning committee. We really want to break down as many walls and as many gates as we possibly can. In the past, I have found that technology has been a lot like the priesthood. And I mean that in the way the priests were, 500 years ago, 700 years ago, where experts in a field rarely want people to understand what they do. When you are an expert in something, you tend to hoard that knowledge. You keep that knowledge to yourself. But we're in a really exciting time right now with the internet, with community, with positive people on social media, where we can actually not hoard our knowledge. We can share it generously. I myself have blogged now for over 20 years, and I've had a podcast for over 15 years. Many of you who are watching have been sharing generously of your knowledge, both here at Craft and also online on your own platforms, as well as social media. And what you're doing is the opposite of gatekeeping, right? So gatekeepers are that high level. Those are those decision makers that decide whether or not something gets shown or not shown, whether information is shared or not shared. And you can then bias your audience. You can decide to share information or not. I would really encourage you and all of our community members to share our energy, Share your energy, share your experiences, be kind as you possibly can, and I assure you that that energy will come back to you. Now, the fundamental philosophy that I have had for all of these years that I've been a community member is to share my keystrokes. If you go to my blog, and if we look at our calendar here and maybe look at our category, here's my blog. I've been blogging since 2002. I'm just going to scroll while I'm talking here. You'll see that there's a lot. I could probably sit here and keep talking while simultaneously scrolling for a while. I'll just actually hold down page down just to give you a sense of how many blog posts there are. The way that you do something like that, the way that you create a corpus of information like this is very simple. You remind yourself to conserve your keystrokes. This is important. If you're going to be a mentor, if you're going to be a sponsor, if you're going to share your knowledge, you have to remember that you have a finite number of keystrokes left in your hands before you die. That's kind of a depressing term, depressing way to think about things. But what that's allowed me to do is take thoughts that I have, and rather than putting them into emails, I put them into blog posts, trying to blog once or twice a week for the last 20 years. If I'm going to go and have a conversation with someone and I'm going to put them on my podcast, I'm going to share that. I'm going to take that information and I'm going to put that in as many places as I possibly can. These are some of the cool people that I've been fortunate enough to talk to on the podcast, almost 800 episodes. Now, if I had had those conversations privately, then no one would get to share that information. But now that I've got that information online and I've taken that information and put that into transcripts that can be searched, then now that information is available. And I try to let people know that we're all amateurs. If I were to have a podcast or a blog and I was constantly reminding you that I'm an expert, I'm a professional, and this is all about important and professional people talking about important professional things, then that wouldn't be very fun and that wouldn't be very inclusive. Ultimately, though, if I think about the last 30 years that I've been in tech, I realized that a lot of the information that I learned in school, a lot of the information that I learned in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, it's been replaced by something else. React and Angular and C# and JavaScript and all the different things that one works with today did not exist when I got my degree, and they may not have existed when you got your degree, even if it was just a few years ago. So if we ask ourselves, are there any professionals? Does one really have 20 years experience? You'll often meet someone that says, oh, I've got 20 years experience. I've got 30 years experience. You have to ask yourself, are those 20 real years, or is it the same year of experience 20 times? Without being intentional, without being deliberate, without being focused, we'll often find ourselves repeating years or losing years. You can sleepwalk through your career if you're not careful. And that's something that can happen in your early times of your career, in your early 20s. You can lose 5 and 10 years very, very quickly if you don't stay conscious and stay humble. I'm reminded of Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web itself. And I saw an interview with him and I noticed his job title. Notice that he didn't put senior web developer. He didn't even put the. He could have said the web developer. But he's modest. He's humble. He knows that he doesn't know everything about the internet. So he could even go and find a mentor himself. You're never too old to get advice. And you're never too young to be a mentor. I think that we sometimes tell ourselves that mentorship relationships are like this, where someone old and experienced lectures someone young and inexperienced once a week, and then that somehow is a mentorship relationship. A weekly lecture from an old person or an experienced person is not a mentorship. Mentors are people who help you define your dream. They help you work to your strengths. They help you get advice. They guide you in your career. But there's another word that I think is more powerful than mentorship. And that mentorship relationship can move to the next level. And the next level is sponsorship. Sponsorship is someone who actively advocates for an early in career person. They're a spotlight, shining a light on another person and creating luck for them. Think about that, creating luck. We always hear about people being lucky or people being not lucky. Luck is the combination of opportunities presenting themselves and that opportunity being combined with you being prepared. So if someone offers you a job, that's quite lucky, only if you are ready to receive that job and have that happen. So luck is opportunity combined with preparedness. Luck can be created by lifting other people into new spaces, by introducing someone with the warm introduction and saying, oh, you should meet this person. Maybe you could chat with that person. Oh, I have a friend who is working in that space. I'll introduce you. And that brings us to a spectrum of sponsorship. Imagine a slider bar from one side to the other, where you're a mentor, you're giving advice, you're helping someone craft their story. Then you can start thinking more about strategy for being hired, strategy for learning new skills. And then you start moving up to the point where you're a connector. You're introducing your early in career person to other opportunities. You're giving them opportunities. You're saying, hey, maybe you should go and speak at Craft. That would be a great opportunity. I'll go and advocate on your behalf. Now you can see that you've moved from being just an advice-giving mentor to an active sponsor who is advocating for the success of the other person. This is often called sending the ladder back down. I feel like I have reached a good place in my career, and now it's my job as I stand on top of something to send the ladder back down. Now, when we become a mentor, sometimes we feel like we have to be a mentor forever. But in fact, we can mentor in phases. Mentorship could be for a month, mentorship could be for a year, and you can break up with your mentor. A mentorship should be a two-way street. It shouldn't be a regularly scheduled lecture where you get together with someone every week and then they just give you a speech. You want to think about your career phase and then the person who is working to mentor you and what their phase is, and trying to make sure that you're in the right place together. Now, a lot of time when I do mentorship, I tell a lot of stories. Rather than teaching classes, I have collected over the years many stories about technology. And I'm not a real expert at anything. I kind of think of myself as a Swiss Army knife. The Swiss Army knife, I actually have one on my desk right here, this funny little knife. It's really kind of a lousy pair of scissors, and it's not a very good screwdriver. It does a lot of things kind of poorly. But the one thing that it does do is it's actually a pretty good knife. So I really come down to the basics, focusing on the basics, and then being a funny little knife that isn't necessarily good at anything. So over the years, I've broken down the four main things that I think people should think about when they are in tech. It's problem solving, layering, composition of systems, and patterns. And I have a couple of stories that I'll share with you before we get to the Q&A in about 15 minutes. So problem solving is a skill that seems to be intuitive for later in career people, but isn't obvious for people who are just getting started. Problem solving is asking yes/no questions at scale. And sometimes people can do it really quickly, and it seems like you give them a problem and they know the answer instantly. And you're like, how did you possibly know that? Well, I know how to ask yes/no questions really fast. One of the things I like to do when I go speak with young people, particularly in high school, people who are 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, is I'll say, my toaster is broken. And I'll sit there and I'll stare at them. And they'll say, well, I thought we were going to learn to code, and now this weird guy is talking about a broken toaster. And I'll say, well, let's just get me some toast, and then we'll learn how to code. I'll say, who here wants to help me debug my broken toaster? Well, simple thinking would be something like, well, you should buy a new toaster, Mr. HANSELMAN. Buy a new toaster. That's why. That's the answer. That's simple thinking. Systems thinking about the system in which that toaster exists and the systems that feed into that toaster to make it successful. Something as simple as toasted bread has a large number of systems that it exists within. So when I ask the young people, help me understand how to debug my broken toaster, maybe one of the young folks will yell out, well, is the power on? Like, there we go. Now you're thinking about it. Do we have power there? One young lady said, you should plug in something else. Maybe you should take a light and plug it in and see if you can get the light to turn on. Maybe you've blown a fuse. Is there any power on in your house of any kind? One time I was giving this talk at Black Girls Code here it was actually in Seattle, and a young lady said, "Do the neighbors have power?" Think about that for a second. I just wanted toast. And this young 14-year-old wanted to know if the neighbors had power. What a clever and thoughtful way of thinking about the system. They are understanding that toast is not going to happen if the power is out across the neighborhood. At this point, it went off the rails and people started asking if aliens had taken all the power and maybe an EMP had destroyed all electricity. I just want toast. But this is the kind of thing you want to be thinking about. When people are early in career, they Google a lot. They Google for their questions because they don't even know what to ask. Later in career, we can ask surgical questions, where one question can eliminate an entire class of problems. That's the power of being later in career. And the only way you can get that ability is by being allowed, being enabled, being encouraged to fail fast and often at scale without judgment. That means you want to join a company as you're early in career, and you want to be able to make mistakes. Be set up to make mistakes quickly so that you can collect those stories yourself, but not necessarily hurt anything or be judged. And this is really important. A lot of folks who are underrepresented in technology might not feel like they can safely fail because someone might think that they're not good at their job, and they'll go, oh, well, look, there's another person of that type who isn't good because they messed up. How could you possibly know some of these things? Here's a list that I just wrote really quickly of all the things that I check when a website is down. If you are from the US, you'll recognize that gentleman on the right there as being our President Abraham Lincoln from the 1860s. There was a famous quote that said, "You can't trust everything that you see on the internet," from Abraham Lincoln from 1860. Here he's saying it's always DNS, because that's usually what it is, isn't it? No matter what's wrong, it's probably DNS. But look at the list on the left there. I just came up with that list of ideas off the top of my head. An early in career person or a student is not going to be able to come up with that list really, really quickly. Those are yes/no questions, really quick questions that I can ask myself at scale. And this is what happens when you ask a later in career or a senior engineer to come over and debug your problem, and it feels magical. And they go, look, it was an environment variable. Look, it was permissions. Oh, you didn't open that socket. You go, how did you know that? It's like, well, that's what many, many years in the industry allows you to do. And the way that the person that you're mentoring or sponsoring can have that experience is by sticking with tech for many years. And it's your job to make sure that that is a welcoming experience. So problem solving is that ability to ask yes/no questions at scale. Now, layering of problems is another thing that's very confusing for folks that are just getting started, because layering is very vertical. It's hiding complexity from yourself and from others. This is abstraction, isn't it? Well, the funny thing about layering, that word layering, is if you remove a few letters, you realize that layering is actually lying. You're lying to yourself, you're lying to systems, because systems are complicated. And by hiding information and by abstracting away complicated bits of information, you're allowing yourself to work with higher level abstractions. So one of the examples I like to give is sending an email. A lot of people know about web development, but no one really thinks about sending an email. You put in an email address, you drop a file attachment in, and you send it, and you don't really think about what's underneath it. Well, I'm going to take this email and I'm going to flip it around and show you what's on the other side. So here on the right-hand side is what's inside email. Look at this. It's name, value pairs. Name, value. Name, value. We spend all this time learning things like YAML or JSON or XML. It's all just name value pairs. Everything in computers is a hash table. Now, this is interesting down here at the bottom. I'm just sending an email, but I noticed that some of the email has text content for plain emails, and sometimes you get emails that have HTML. And you notice here that we have a multi-part email. And we see this MIME type on line 10 right there. Well, where have I seen things like this before? This is what email looks like on the wire. Here's what HTML looks like when you post a form. Email, posting from an HTML form. That's multi-part form data with MIME types. The internet is fundamentally a series of ideas that have been reused over the years. So if you know how to do form posts, then you probably already know how email works. HTML is text that uses HTTP over port 80. Email is basically the same, except it uses a different protocol over port 25. But ports are ports, text is text, and name-value pairs are name-value pairs. So you'll notice that these ideas that Tim Berners-Lee and his friends and our friends who have developed the internet over the last 20 or 30 years are just reusing good ideas. Here's two really old things that I often show early in career folks. And I ask them, what are these things? Sometimes they can identify the one on the left as being a hard drive, except hard drives now are even weirder looking. It's surprising for me as an old person to think about this is a hard drive now. Like that's what a hard drive looks like. So the fact that there's no spinning circles is a little bit disappointing, I think. The one on the left there is a spinning hard drive, a magnetic media. And the one on the right is a record player over 100 years old, maybe 120 years old. But both of them have information encoded on a disk. One has a magnetic head and one has a needle. But fundamentally, they are arcs, circles of information encoded on spinning disks. Ideas that are good inevitably get reused, and those ideas then get layered on top of each other. Now then when we have layers, when we have good ideas, we can compose them. We can use composition, and composition is modeling has-a relationships where something has a this and it has a that, and those layers and those compositions build up into impossibly complicated systems that we can then debug. If you understand them, you can start debugging them. Even if you don't understand them, you can dig into them. This gentleman here is an actor named Chris Connor, who was in a show called Altered Carbon on Netflix. And here he's playing Edgar Allan Poe as an AI. He's an artificial intelligence that lives inside a hotel, and he's a very good actor, and it's a very good show that you should watch. And I'm a big fan. So I tweeted him on Twitter and I said, hey man, this is a great job. This is just a good role. You're awesome, because I'm a fan. Turns out he lived in Portland, Oregon, where I live. So I decided I'm going to be this guy's friend because he's cool. So I shoot my shot and I say, hey, do you want to hang out? We can do a podcast. And we did. And we hung out and we did a podcast, and he's a lovely guy. And I talked to him. I took my portable recorder and my SD card, and I said, hey, we'll have a great chat. We talked for 30 minutes, and we went to have tacos. And then I went home, and I plugged the SD card into my computer. And this is what I found. Nothing. I just talked to this really cool guy. I'm thinking to myself, we're going to be friends. And look what I find on the disk. An infinite recursive series of empty folders. Is it corrupted? Am I ever going to talk to this guy again? Is he going to be mad? I can't exactly call him and say, hey, can we record all over again? I thought I was going to die. This was the worst feeling ever. But I looked at my disk and I saw that Windows, even though it couldn't see the files, it saw that the space was used up. You see, it uses about 300 megs. So there's a file in there somewhere. I know about layering. I know about lying. I know about composition. I don't know anything about storage, but I know that I can read and I can learn and I can dig. So I started digging, and I started learning about FAT32, the file allocation table, and the way that things are stored and how things are allocated on disk. And I started to learn what was missing and what wasn't. And I rebuilt the file allocation table with a hex editor, and it took me quite a long time. But keep in mind, I didn't want to have to call this man back and try to re-record. I ultimately found that file, saved it, and published the show, and it was a great show. But this was a really good reminder to me that nothing in the computer is hidden. How far do I want to dig? We write applications, we talk to the file system, and honestly, we remove the rest of the stuff. We just trust that it works. And it all does work until one day, one of these little SD cards decides to fail, and then we have to go and figure out what got corrupted. And then suddenly the layering, the lying, leaks. The abstractions leak. And then we have to go and dig. I usually spend my time up here at the top two of these, but I know that I can dig below. It's a lot like driving in an Uber. You get an Uber and you get a Lyft, you get a taxi, they take you somewhere, and you don't think about the car. But every once in a while, the car, the Uber that you're riding in breaks down. A little knowledge about engines, tires, oil would help you help the Uber driver save you. So you don't have to know these things. You're an early in career person. You don't have to know these things, but it's nice to know how to drive a stick shift, how to drive a manual shift car so that you might be more successful. And then patterns, and finally, pattern recognition. Pattern recognition is that ability for someone who has seen a problem to recognize it and say, I have seen that again, and then they instantly solve the problem. This is what happens at work when you're dealing with one of your coworkers and you're debugging a problem and they go and they say, oh, it's that. And you're like, how did you know that? But the answer is usually, well, I'm old and I've been doing this a long time. But it's really pattern recognition. I've seen that before. One day, I spent 13 hours debugging an obscure segmentation fault when I tried to take a .NET application and install it on a Raspberry Pi. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get this little computer to run my simple program. I spent 13 hours over 2 days debugging this, and it was very frustrating. And I eventually made a folder called good, and I made a folder called bad, and I did a comparison, a hex comparison between the one that runs and the one that doesn't. And I noticed that there was a character missing. 0D was gone in the one that didn't run. Why am I missing 0D? How would you even begin to do that? What do you even Google for to learn something like this? Well, I've seen things like this before. And when I was FTPing my file, I noticed that there is a setting in FileZilla, the tool that I use, called Treat Files Without an Extension as Ascii. This doesn't have an extension, so it was being delivered as a text file. This is a binary file I want to run, and it was being delivered as a text file, and I know that 0D is the integer 13, which means carriage return. How could anyone know that? What's a carriage? Why is it returning? Sometimes we deal with Git. We see carriage return line feed. I think we've all heard that term, CRLF, carriage return line feed. Ask anyone under 30, what's a carriage and why is it returning? The carriage carries the paper, and the carriage return is this lever that you pull on, and it pulls the carriage, returning it to its home, and then the knob turns and feeds the line. That was created in Ascii, and before that, Ibadak, in order to tell a typewriter, a terminal, at the terminal end of a computer, to return the carriage and feed the line. And now it's 2021, and whether we have a MacBook Pro or a Surface Pro, we still have to think about carriages and line feeds, and no one's touched a typewriter in 20 years. And now that I've told this to you, one day I will save you 13 hours of debugging, because you're going to see 0D and you're going to go, in a second, that's a carriage return. I think I saw that at HANSELMAN's talk at Craft. I think that's going to save me some time. Problem solving is asking yes/no questions at scale. Layering hides information. Composition builds large systems. And patterns remind you of things that you've seen before. So we can take all of these things and we can build amazing, amazing technologies. We can create amazing stuff. And we can collect stories. We can collect all of these stories and we can tell them in engaging ways to encourage our mentees Think about the collection of stories that you have, write them down, put them in your blog. Ask yourself, do those stories humanize tech? And then help your mentees share their own stories, develop their own stories, and hopefully give talks at lovely conferences like this one. I'm so glad that you're here, and I know that our friends at Craft are happy that you're here as well. I thank you very much. I would encourage you to follow me on TikTok. And now I think we're going to turn to Julia, who hopefully will have some questions from our friends on the conference platform.
Yes, hopefully too. Thank you for thank you for this presentation. I loved a lot. Everyone, please go to the Q&A section and start typing up your questions so that Scott can answer them. While we are waiting for everyone to phrase their curiosity, it occurred to me at the beginning of your talk when you talked about sponsorship versus mentorship and creating luck, that it is very parallel in my head with sharing privilege, especially when I observe it in the light of maybe someone who is looks more like the in-group of tech and with people who are underrepresented. Do you share this understanding?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There is a very, very wonderful speaker named Anwan Simmons, A-N-J-U-A-N, Anwan Simmons, and he has a talk called Lending Privilege.
Yes, this is where I got the idea from, I think, with his talk maybe 2 years ago in Craft. He spoke yesterday about managing burnout. I have seen this talk.
Anwan and his wife have talked about burnout. I've had them both on my podcast, and I've spoken to him before about lending privilege. This idea that he's developed indicates that there are lots of different kinds of privilege. For example, at the company I am at, I'm a technically senior leader, and I have level privilege in that my level at the job is higher. So I can lend that privilege to someone by simply inviting them to a meeting that they've never been to. Privilege does not just come in forms like gender and skin color and age and money and things like that. It can be many, many things. So lending your privilege is interesting. And what Anwan points out is that some privileges you have unlimited versions of. I have an unlimited amount of level privilege, because I'm not going to invite someone to a meeting and then I've run out. I've exhausted my privilege. So I like to use that to lift as many people as possible at work. So yeah, Anwan and his wife are both brilliant in that respect.
I agree. And then we do share this idea. In the meanwhile, a question arrived in Hopin. I'm going to read it out as you probably don't see it. Christian Todt asks, how can I decide whether I really have enough experience/knowledge to start mentoring newcomers?
That is a wonderful, wonderful question. How do you decide if it's too early for you to be a mentor? I think the same question can be asked when someone says, well, I'm too early to blog. Well, I'm not asking you to be an expert. I'm asking you to share your journey. So if you're 1 year ahead or 2 years ahead of someone else, time to start mentoring someone who is 1 year behind. If you're a junior or a senior in your final year of university, wouldn't that be a great time for you to mentor an incoming first-year student? So yes, you only need to be a year or two ahead of someone to simply turn around and share your experiences, because it's your experiences that they need more than your expertise. So don't wait around to become an expert. Simply collect your life's experience. And if you want to mentor someone who looks like you and say, hey, we look the same, we act the same, we come from the same country, we speak the same language, this is my experience, maybe it will help you. Or find someone who doesn't look or come from any culture like yours and say, here's my experience, I know it will be different from yours, but maybe we can work together to lift each other as a team.
Yes, it's mentor early and mentor often, I guess. While we are waiting for potential future questions, I had another question that popped into my mind, and it was not entirely in the realm of your presentation, but you mentioned you're like a Swiss Army knife and like you always, dig in where you need to dig in. But this is a huge amount of continuous learning. My job, I see, and I this is my understanding of your job, is just continuously learning what we really need at the time. And how do you feel you can maintain this capacity? This is really mentally exhausting. Or like biologically, our capacity might diminish. Do you have any tricks on that?
That's a very good question. So if you think about it as being exhausting, if it is work for you to learn, you have to shift your mindset a little bit and imagine kind of like you're filling a bucket and it's going to overflow, and then you have to just slow down a little bit, and then you have bursts of creativity, you have bursts of learning, and then you can relax a little bit. It's like working out. You can't work out 7 days a week. Your muscles need rest. This muscle needs rest. But when you have a burst of creativity or a burst of excitement about a topic and you dive in, you have to know that about yourself. You have to recognize it. You have to feel it. And one of the things that I think we don't do enough as humans and enough as technologists is be conscious and deliberate and intentional and listen to our bodies and go, I'm really excited about React right now. I think I'm going to spend some time on that, and I'm going to really think about it. And that doesn't mean goof around and do a tutorial. That doesn't mean mess around and watch some YouTubes. It means let's get a piece of paper, let's make a plan, and let's learn and really intentionally do it. And you can catch yourself being intentional, being mindful. You may hear the term mindfulness a lot. I catch myself probably twice a day on autopilot. If you're driving and then have you ever been driving and then you remember, oh my God, I'm driving. And then you went 5 kilometers and you don't remember any of that. You were just on autopilot. That happens in life. So when you're learning and you're thinking about learning, sometimes it can just be on autopilot. You're not really there. A couple of times a day, I'll just go, okay, I got a half an hour between 2 meetings. I'm just going to go and sit in the sun, and I'm going to think about where I'm at, where am I in my journey, where am I in my day, in my week, in my month. Just reassert your plan. And that intentionality is a release that allows you to go forward and maintain that pace.
That's excellent advice. Thank you. I'll take it to heart.
Thank you for the question.
In the meanwhile, 2 new questions appeared, and I think we just have enough time for them. One of them is from Tamás Okros, who said, nowadays every firm's looking for Swiss Army knives who are perfect in every area. So any idea how to convince them, I guess the firms, on an interview that a simple Swiss Army knife can do 99% of what they really need?
That is a wonderful question. And actually, I even have on my desk right here, that one and that one. That Swiss Army knife seems like a good idea, doesn't it? It's really kind of ridiculous, though. And it has more tools than I need, and they're all really kind of bad, and it's uncomfortable in your pocket. So I agree that a simple Swiss Army knife is a better product, and this is kind of ridiculous. I don't even know what this one does. It's got like a compass, and it's a clear, I don't know. It's a tough one. I think that some companies still need to be taught, and it's very difficult. When you need a job, you need a job. And if the company is dysfunctional and needs to be taught, it's not really your job to teach it. So I don't really have good advice on that. I think it's really on senior leaders, many of which are hopefully watching right now, to change that culture. It's not on the early in career person to try to convince that company. I think the easiest thing that someone can do is find a leader inside that company who can open the door for you, who can look at you. And that's where the sponsorship comes in, right? Sponsorship is opportunity making. If you can have someone give you a warm introduction, right? So if I know Julia and Julia knows Anwan, and then I say, oh, well, I'm friends with Julia and Julia's friends with Anwan. So now Anwan and I are friends. That triangle of the warm introduction is a way to break into companies. So authentic networking, I think, is the way to do that. And then, of course, we as senior leaders, hopefully changing the culture slowly at these companies.
Yeah, I think it's a different kind of task to affect this change when you're inside and you're designing the interviewing loops or when you're just knocking on the door. There is another question from Christoph Wallach. I really hope I pronounced his name right. And he asked, what's your advice on bringing mentoring culture to a company never practiced it? How to persuade management and let me code devs. I don't know what let me code devs are with dashes.
So bringing mentorship culture to a company, you can't just make this up. There are plans, there are books, there are structures already created. So you shouldn't feel that you need to invent the concept of mentorship. You don't have to just, let's get some young people in here and we'll start talking to them. Actually be intentional. Read some books. Just like learning a new library or learning React or learning .NET involves reading a book and thinking about it, I would encourage you to go and look at some of the existing talks, the existing books on mentorship, and start small. Consider, rather than bringing people in from outside the company, do you have talent inside the company that perhaps could move up and get more opportunities? You may be sitting next to the person that you could be mentoring or sponsoring at your company today. So making sure that you're growing talent from within. And I think a good way to do that is by having we call them brown bag lunches. Let's all bring our lunch and we'll sit around the table at lunchtime and we can talk about what do you want to learn? And then we have a peer mentorship team at my company where we mentor each other based on skills. So we made a spreadsheet of my name and my skills and the things I'm good at and the things I want to learn. And then we can go and say, oh, well, I know this and you know that. Let's work together on these skills. So I can teach them about public speaking. They can teach me about machine learning, and everyone gets lifted together.
Yes, I have similar experience. I have experience in my companies where I've been at, that mentorship started really small and just like really in the form of peer mentorship and worked very well as it built up and got more corporate support or company support. We do not have any more questions for now, so I think this is the time when I'm thanking you again for coming and sharing your story with us. We have a little something prepared for you that I hope my colleagues here can put on the screen and that we hope to get to you eventually.
Oh, well, that is very kind. Thank you so much.